The Rhode Island Foundation, partnering with passionate Rhode Islanders to lead, transform, and inspire our state. Learn more at rhodeislandfoundation.org.
Welcome to another segment of In Another Opinion, a public information program where our discussions are focused on the communities of color in the state of Rhode Island. I'm your host, Peter Wells. My guests today are Delia Rodriguez-Masjoan, a community and immigration worker in the city of Providence, and Javier A. Juarez, a Brown University student and a research fellow at the Latino Policy Institute at Roger Williams University. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We're glad to have you. This subject of DACA, which we're going to talk about today, is really something that's hitting communities across the country. Tell me, Javier, what's your opinion of DACA?
Well, being a DACA recipient myself, I understood that this was only a temporary solution. Once the program was rolled out in 2012 by President Barack Obama as an executive order, we knew that it was only for 2 years, right? And then you were able to renew for another 2 years. I was fortunate enough to renew for 3 times, so I was able to renew for 6 years. But as a bigger subject, right? It was only a temporary solution for this bigger immigration problem that this country has. Now, DACA was only for this particular people like me who were brought here to the United States when they were kids. So DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And it did help around 800,000 people. However, there are other 11 million undocumented folks in the country that are looking for a quicker path to citizenship, which Congress never kind of passed.
Right. And it doesn't appear that this particular Congress is going to do that anytime soon. But hopefully I'm wrong. Delia, tell me, since you work in the field, in the community, you've worked with people who are trying to improve their immigration status. Has DACA presented any issues for you in doing the work that you do?
No, I think in the beginning when DACA came out, there were a lot of people that were very fearful because, as Javier said, it was a temporary solution. Mm-hmm. So the issue was, do I give out all my information to the government, go through all this process for something that could end sometime in the future? And by that time, you knew it could happen, but you really didn't think it could, and then you could renew it. So it was trying to educate the communities about the pros and cons. We enlisted a lot of experts from around the country, in particular the executive director of the National Immigration Law Center, Marilena Incapié, who's grew up here in Rhode Island, and she was able to do a lot of online interviews for the community because it was scary. And now we see what could happen once somebody decides, like the president, to end that temporary status because it was an executive order, it wasn't statute, it wasn't in the law. Right. So now you have all these dreamers, as they're called, not knowing what the future holds, not knowing in 6 months or when their status ends, because some of them applied before October 5th for their renewal, and they will be protected for 2 years. But what will happen once their protection ends? And that's going to, be another brainstorming and figuring out what each person has in order to find out what could be done.
Well, hopefully, Javier, that you don't experience the other side of this, the deportation. But if that were presented to you and your family, what impact would that be on your family?
Well, it would be a very catastrophic scenario for my family, because not only we have been living here for about 18 years now. My parents own a home, they're workers, but taking me out of this equation, meaning as a family, as a household, we contribute so much to the way that we live. So taking me out of that financially will be very catastrophic for us. Our mortgage, our everyday bills, our car insurance and things like that, we all kind of contribute, from working. So taking me out will be a big financial burden for them. And my little sister's also starting college, and although she is a citizen and she does get financial aid, it is still very tough to still meet those payments, especially when my parents are working, low-paying jobs. And then if I'm deported, meaning that I'm not going to be working anymore, I'm going to be in a different country trying to support myself. And then seeing that, from the outside, seeing my family struggle, it's going to be very tough. And I know I'm not the only one in this position.
Sure.
Most of these DACA recipients are first-generation immigrants who are also contributing to their own debt, to their own bills and things like that. So by removing these 800,000 DACA recipients and separating those families, it's going to be tough to see them struggle. Maybe, my father is going to have to take up another job. My mother's going to have to take up another job, and my dad's going to be in his 60s, so it's going to be very tough to see that from the outside, and I hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I hope not either. As from your perspective, Delia, what do you think the impact, or have you seen the impact of deportations on any of the people you've worked with?
Well, you see the fear that people have just with the thought of the possibility of deportation, that not knowing what the future holds. And it's devastating, just the thought that you'll be separated from a loved one, a close relative, somebody that contributes to your family, that is part of your everyday environment, and that they could just be separated against their will is very traumatic. And when you, in some instances, proof to defend a deportation is that the citizen or resident has to show that they're going to suffer extreme hardship with this, and they have to see counselors. And when you read these letters, they're really devastating. The fear that the family have, a lot of us, included myself, have mixed families in our immediate circle of family. So it's that constant worry of what's going to happen.
One of the things that occurs to me is that the president has suggested that he would, the immediate deportations would be of people who have had some issues, maybe with the law or whatever. But to me, that's rather shallow. What's exceptions or what suggestions you would give to the president, Javier, in looking at this whole issue of making a better policy?
That's a loaded question. So if I'm talking about the context of DACA, having kind of like this time clock behind your head of when your work authorization is going to be up. So like mine is going to be up in December of next year. So knowing that by December next year, I'm not going to have any documentation is pretty scary. I'm not sure if I'll get deported. I mean, hopefully Congress passes something where people that were in this program are going to be safe, but seeing how they're delaying or they're not really coming to this conclusion, what they're going to do, I have to think ahead, right? I have to make different strategic plans of how I'm going to pay for my education or save some money for, worst comes to worst. If I were close to the president, I can kind of like, push him to do something. It would just be to really think about the consequences of deporting this 800,000 people, because not only are they contributing through taxation to their states and and the country as a whole, they're also there are people that are hardworking, there are people that are in school, there are people that have their teachers, their nurses, their doctors. And I think America, what America's trying to do is trying to be more competitive, globally. And by deporting these people, it's one of the things that we don't need, right? We need those people to be in this country. We need their tax money, because not only are senior citizens reliant or depending on these tax dollars for their retirement, for their Medicare. By removing 800,000 people out of this equation, it's going to be a bigger burden on the everyday citizen, and it's going to cause a bigger financial crisis, in my point of view.
Well, this is true, and I know that President Obama and his administration, of course, being responsible for the legislation, or the executive order, I should say, for DACA, did have this concept of improved globalization. But this administration is actually reversing that and trying to become more nationalistic and more insular. Delia, again, is there anything that you would suggest, let's say, to the president or even to Congress, as to what should be in any national legislation?
Yeah. I think it's Congress now who has the opportunity to do something, and it's really a brain drain. We see how many third world countries lose a lot of their professional folks to other countries. That's going to happen here, and especially when you look at that DACA, one of the main requirements was that you graduated and that you had an education. And if you see, the majority of these dreamers, these DACA recipients, have paid for their school, have worked 2 and 3 jobs, not only supporting their family, paying for school and everything. Javier goes to Brown University. How many people can go to Brown University from our community and being a dreamer? So you don't have access to student loans, you don't have access to Pell Grant, so it's really, you're working 2 and 3 times more. Not to say that other people don't, but in this case, you must.
Yes.
And many people will say, well, why don't these people just get a green card or a citizenship and stuff? The laws are not made to make it that easy.
Yes.
If I petition for my sister, it's a 14-year wait.
Wow.
And if she has kids and the kids have been waiting, by the time she gets her green card, her kids are going to be over 21, at which time then she will have to petition for them, and it's going to take another 10 years.
Is there any difference between the number of people that are allowed into the country based on country? For instance,
yes, there's quotas,
right?
And there's certain countries that use more visas than other countries. So there are countries like the Philippines, like China, Mexico, that have used so many visas that if I was Mexican and I petitioned for my sister in Mexico, it's like a 25-year wait.
Wow.
So it does vary. It's not a lot of countries. There are a few of them, but even yearly, on a yearly basis, there's about 800,000 visas that are given out in general for family, which means spouses of residents, adult sons and daughters of citizens, married sons of citizens, siblings of citizens, all those, plus employment green cards, plus refugees, plus diversity, all those together are a little over 800,000 a year.
And that's nationally we're talking
Worldwide.
about. Worldwide?
Yes.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is that there are not that many people that immigrate on a yearly basis with green cards, and that's why the waits are so long.
Makes sense.
Okay. There's immediate relatives for spouses of citizens and parents of citizens, but it's not that big. So that's why things have to change in order to make it. And then depending where the person is, let's say that I petitioned for my sister and she's waited the 14 years and she's been here that time. When she gets her number, oh, I got my number. Now she has to travel to Argentina. She has to go to the embassy, and the minute she leaves, now she's going to be penalized for 10 years before being able to come back.
Wow.
So many times people, knowing that, all these barriers and penalties, are like, well, I'm not going to apply.
Sure.
Or if you apply and you have the visa in your hand, you don't go forward to complete the case because there's no way.
You know, most of the conversation that we hear about and we talk about DACA in this country, unfortunately, refers to people coming in from South America, from Central America and Mexico. Don't hear much about immigrants coming in or people coming in from Canada and other parts of the world. In your opinion, do you think that President Trump's policy of kicking DACA back to Congress is a racist issue?
I do, and I say that because his platform was on this national "Make America Great Again" slogan that was, catchy, I guess. But it is racist because the people that it's affecting are these immigrants, those first-generation low-income families that are already here. And like Delia said, this immigration visa quota that's happening, it's only for the Chinese or the Mexican or the South American countries, but it's not for the European countries like Great Britain, Scotland. Yes. So there is a racist tendency. Him and Jeff Sessions have been very open about what they want and how they want to limit immigration. But that's not the best way to do it. If they wanted to limit immigration, I think, obviously, Border Patrol, by building a wall, it's just kind of a symbolic more than a physical change. By taking away DACA, they know that 800,000 people are depending on this program. They know their audience can see that, oh, he's working for us. These people shouldn't be here anyways. So that tendency is racist in my point of view, because not only is it affecting those first-generation low-income immigrants from South American backgrounds, Latino backgrounds, even African backgrounds, Asian backgrounds. It's affecting everything but white.
It appears
white
that
population.
Way. It does appear that way.
So it does have a racist tendency, in my point of view.
How about you, Delia? You have a diversity of clients, I assume. What do you think the sense is from them as to the policies right now?
Well, the problem is that in order to enact law, you need Congress to do something about it. And it's been a very long time since Congress has come together and put something forth to change immigration law. The last biggest immigration law was the IRCA law of 1986 that gave amnesty to over 3 million people. The issue is that President Obama had to do the executive order as a way to at least create something that was temporary, to at least say, this is an issue and we need to address it. There was an attempt with Bush right before 9/11, and there was a lot of bickering coming back and forth, and nothing ever happened. And every president that I can think of back to the 60s would talk about immigration as an important issue for this country, but nothing ever happens until, like I mentioned, 1986. For now, something to happen, in order to become law, to be a statute, to be something that's permanent, Congress has to act on it. And Congress at this time is not in favor of doing anything that will help dreamers. And unfortunately, until that changes, it's going to continue with the same thing. And the only remedy at this point is the president to go back and say, you know what, since Congress hasn't done anything, let me do something with executive order, the way he's been legislating his 10 months in office.
Yeah, to tweets and those kinds of things.
But Congress really does need to do something permanent.
Now, you're from Argentina originally.
Yes.
And Javier, you're from Peru originally. You speak the language, I imagine.
Yeah.
What about the numbers of dreamers who came here and only know English and don't know their native tongues or their ancestral tongues, I should say? What kind of impact does that have on a youngster going back to a country who may not even have any family there? Where would they go?
I don't even think much about the language, but the way, because it's like saying you're not good for this country. We're going to send you back. Because, like I was saying before, folks like Javier, they're brilliant. They are like amazing young people who have a lot to contribute. But it's the being like sent back to situations that, you know, you didn't ask for that.
You mentioned in the green room that your son, or earlier that your son had gone back to Argentina for a couple of years.
Yes.
How was that introduction for him going back to?
It was very difficult, but it was a learning experience, and I think that the knowing that you can come back at any time, like you did, is a different experience.
Exactly.
Because I'm sure that if Javier could say, "Oh, I'm going to go to Peru for a year to study there," he'd love to, as long as he can come back.
Sure.
But not being told, "Well, you're going, but you're not coming back," it would be detrimental, because
scenario.
I mean, his talent, his skill, his academics and everything, and most dreamers that I've worked with are incredible. So it's, I think, a great loss for the country, a great loss for Rhode Island, and hopefully Congress does. But you have to talk more about your personal.
To answer that question,
sure.
They're definitely going to have some type of difficulties going back. Not only because they're going to a foreign place, it's because they've never been able to go to a foreign place before.
That's true.
These DACA recipients were not able to leave the country unless they applied for a particular purpose, either work or school or.
Prior to DACA, you could not, or since DACA.
Well, prior to DACA or since DACA.
Okay.
Obviously, prior to DACA, if you left the country without documentations, you were going to have to
sneak back in.
Right?
Okay.
After
gotcha.
DACA, although you were able to have a work permit and a license, you were able to travel internally in the country, but not outside the country, unless you applied for, you had work or you had, a study abroad, and even those things were very difficult to obtain. Maybe like an emergency where you had to go back to the country of origin for something. So, if these people that have been here their whole lives and they have been caged in that country because, again, they weren't able to travel before.
Right.
Now we're just going to drop them in a foreign country, expect them to be okay, and expect them to find the norms of those countries and be okay, then that's just very silly, because they weren't able to do anything like that before. Now, as far as what DACA has provided these people, it was literally just a piece of paper that says, hey, you can work now. You can contribute to the economy, right? But that piece of paper didn't make them work harder, didn't study for them, didn't pass their exams for them. It was just literally one piece of paper that gave them some type of documentation where they can actually start living their lives like human beings and not be under the shadows, trying to be sneaky with work. Sure. Or taking the bus to work or things like that. The DACA program was so important because it brought out all these people that were already here that everyone was ignoring. And now that they're here, they're asking for that documentation again. They're asking for that piece of paper again.
You know, it reminds me of stories that I've read about. And to some degree, my grandmother even told me about the end of slavery, and slaves who were then freed were given a piece of paper that said you were free. Doesn't necessarily mean anybody would have to accept that piece of paper and deal with it on that basis. So I can see the correlation.
I've always made comparisons of the Emancipation Proclamation and DACA. And although there are different times and different severity to enslavement and today's immigration problem, there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah, there is.
Because after Abe Lincoln signed that piece of paper, all these people they were humans again. They were able to work. They were able to have a family and buy a home and be okay. Like now with DACA, same thing. President Obama signed DACA, and then all these people, the first thing they did was apply for this program. Now you voluntarily had to put your information to the government, but we thought we were in good hands, right? Okay, the government's not going to do something shady where they're just going to deport all of us, right? We trusted on the government to do that. And it was fine for those 5 years that it was implemented. But now that it's over, I know Delia keeps calling us dreamers, but we're also realists, right? We understand the we understand that this program is over. Now we have to think strategically, think ahead, think about when that particular work permit is going to expire, what we're going to do after, what can we do now to either graduate from school, save some money for worst case scenarios, how to help our parents kind of cope with this emotional feeling. And again, physically and it's emotionally draining to be in this particular position. And that's what the American population needs to understand, that by putting a time clock on people's, minds, it's creating this different type of immigrant monster, right?
Well, I'm sure.
They're looking to not only, again, save or plan for the better, but they're starting to freak out. Like, everyone's going to get laid off, right?
Sure. Delia, tell me about your experience in this same vein. Compromises, what's reasonable for a national policy? Anything that you might add to that?
It's really, I think that Congress, I mean,
it's back to
they're
Congress.
the ones. It's back to Congress. I mean,
what do you see coming out of Congress?
I think they're going to be fighting a lot. I think they're going to be using it as a token to fight for other things. The president has already said that, if Democrats want to change something, they have to come talk to him, and he's including in the mix the wall, health care, all these other things that he wants to do, and kind of holding DACA recipients as hostage.
Yeah.
And it's really sad. And there are going to have to be other remedies that people look at too. And it's going to be on an individual basis, because it's not going to be a blanket thing. It's going to be like what your relationships are, where you are, how you came, what have you been doing, like a whole number of things in order to figure out what the next steps. What we have seen is that in the past, there have been other temporary programs, such as TPS, temporary protective status.
Right.
And individuals from different countries have been granted this protection that would allow people, similar to the Dreamers, if you were, like, for example, Liberia has had TPS since the early 1990s.
Yeah, Senator Reid's been very active with that one here.
Exactly. But that's a temporary thing. What's the irony of it is that you have people that have entered as refugees way after people who have TPS from Liberia from the early 90s who are already citizens, and people from Liberia who have TPS only have TPS, which is a work authorization.
Well, unfortunately, I'm hoping that Congress finds a way to remember their own roots. But unfortunately for us, we've run out of time, and we'll have to have you back on the show and come exactly have you come back some more and spend some more time with us. But we have run out of time, and I want to thank today's guests, Delia Rodriguez-Masjoan and Javier Juarez, and you, the listeners, for tuning in to another segment of In Another Opinion. A special thanks to PBS for making this program possible. I'm your host, Peter Wells. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at inanotheropinion@gmail.com. And have a great day.
The Rhode Island Foundation, partnering with passionate Rhode Islanders to lead, transform, and inspire our state. Learn more at rhodeislandfoundation.org.